Hey folks, Judd Oaks here again, trying out a new camera I got here because my web camera killed me, and basically gonna go over one mode today, and that mode is the Mixolydian mode. What is the Mixolydian mode? Well, if you know from previous posts over at Lefty Guitar Trader, it's basically mode 5 of the major scale, of its parent major scale. But I'm trying to get people to understand that, to not think about it that way and to think of it as its own scale. So basically I'm going to talk about G Mixolydian. Its parent major scale is C major. So you can find G Mixolydian by playing a C major scale starting on the 5th note of the scale, which would be G. But in this case, basically the scale formula for G Mixolydian is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, and 1. So relating back to the major scale, it's telling you that the 7th degree is now lowered a half step. So I'll play through G Mixolydian here. And I'll play G major just to so you hear the difference. Here's G major. G Mixolydian again. Okay, so basically that's the difference. Basically, if you think about the half steps, there's only one note difference, like I was telling you, from the G major to the G Mixolydian. So what that means is the half step changes. Basically on the major scale you had a half step between the 3rd and the 4th, and then the 7th going back into the root, or the leading tone sometimes they call it, like this one. So you have going back on to the scale formula is you know, the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7. Now the chord scale that goes with that would be you get the 1 dominant 7, right? So that would be, then you have a 2 minor 7, right? Then you have a 3 minor 7 flat 5, right? Then you have a 4 major 7, right? Then you have a 5 minor 7, right? And then you have a 6 minor 7, and then you have a flat 7 major 7, and I'll come down here back to the 1. And right there, and these are harmonized in majors, in 7th chords. And basically think of them in triads. You have the G major, right, and then you have the A minor, then you have a B diminished, right, you have a B diminished, then you have a C major, then you have a D minor, E minor, F major, back to G. And most rock tunes, they probably won't use the 7th chords, at least for the 1 chord. Like in the progression, you'd have say a Mixolydian progression, you know, these major chord progressions like a 1, 4, 5, and Mixolydian has its own progression as well. So Mixolydian has a progression too. So how do you make Mixolydian mode stand out? Well, basically you get a look at what the differences are in the chord qualities between the major scale and the Mixolydian mode, or Mixolydian scale, really, because, you know, calling it a mode is like a, you know, evil stepsister or something. But it's good in its own thing. So, well, right off the bat, you know, the flat 7 is going to be, that note is what makes it different. So basically, you think of all the chords that we talked about with the Mixolydian mode versus the major scale chord scales, to see what the differences are, and kind of play chords that show those differences. And like one, for example, pretty, you know, common one would be going from the root down to the flat 7 to the 4 back to the root. And I'm just playing the root notes here, but a bass would be going like, so right there, that chord, see, you play G major, F major, C major, G major, F major, C major, and then you say, wait a minute, but those chords are in C major, you know? Yeah, I just changed my emphasis on where the root is. That one is a famous chord progression, you know. And that bass, basically that chromatic line, is pretty famous on the bass player too. So playing the Mixolydian mode, you know, you want to emphasize that flat 7. And you can almost hear that in that. In that thing, but basically you're just playing Mixolydian. And that's how you kind of get the sound of what Mixolydian is versus the major scale, or playing, because the major scale obviously doesn't have that flat 7 chord in it, right? And that's the most different tone, obviously, is if it's in the root of the chord, it's going to have the most difference, right? And then, well, you could say, well, I could go and so you're going like, you could play G major, D minor, it doesn't have as much pull though, that I think of as right. Instead, maybe if you had 5s, so you're going 1, 5, 1, 5. So that might work too, but you're trying to look at one chord flowing to the other and stuff. But like I said, that's one aspect of the modes. They don't have sometimes the pull between each of the chords like the major or minor counterpart, you know, the parent major scale. Anyway, that's Mixolydian. So recapping, basically the Mixolydian is a fifth mode of its parent major scale, meaning that it has the same notes as the major scale. But in this case, I'm trying to get people to think in parallel, meaning they have their own individual roots, and it's paralleled, or that has the same root, like G major, G Mixolydian, G Lydian when we talk about Lydian, and G Aeolian. It all has the same root, but the chord structure and the note sequences are different. The whole and half steps and where they're located within the scale. And some people get hung up on the whole half, whole half, and trying to figure that out. But you know, it works great on piano, but I think from a guitar standpoint, this thing is a pattern-oriented machine. Like that, this chord structure is the same as this, and it's a pattern that you can memorize and not really have to memorize the notes. I'm not saying it's not good to memorize the notes, but if you know where the root, the fifth, and the third are in the chord, that's all you need really, and you're moving it around. And then the same for the scales, you know. Say 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. And then you can move that around, like if we're playing a Mixolydian, I'll change it up. Right there I played a Mixolydian. So in that one I'm doing the same scale pattern, but I've moved it up a whole step. So now I'm in an A Mixolydian. So the chord progression for that would be, of course, A to G to D. And that's it. But I like people to think about G, but like I said, to move this stuff, you just basically keep the same pattern and move up. Remember what your root note is. In this case, it's the lowest note. It's not always the case, but it is for this pattern, and then just move it accordingly. Anyway, so Mixolydian mode, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, flat 7, 1. The chord scale is 1 dominant 7, 2 minor 7, 3 minor 7, flat 5, 4 major 7, 5 minor 7, 6 minor 7, and a flat 7 major 7. And the triad for that would be a 1 major. A 1 major is a 2 minor, it's a 3 diminished in this case because of the chord scale there, because of the flat 5. And it'd be 4 major, 5 minor, 6 minor, flat 7 major. And that's the chord scale. And if you start messing around with those things, you can get a grip of Mixolydian, you know, and then you can do some pedal tones, like and you got to look at where the half steps are, because those are the notes that are going to give you the most pull to wherever you're going to next. you like it. Until next time, we'll probably try and go into more detail about, we'll get into the Lydian mode. And I'm trying to bypass the major scale because I think everybody knows the major scale, also called Ionian mode. But we'll talk about that last. And like I said in my post, I relate the Mixolydian and the Lydian mode to the major scale or Ionian mode because of the third in those different scales are all major thirds. And then vice versa in the minor quality sounding scales or modes, I relate the Dorian, the Phrygian, and the Locrian back to Aeolian because of the flatted third or the minor third in that scale. But anyway, we'll talk then. Until then, jam on, man.